Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are going to start with only one good thing, which is hard for me because I've actually had a great fucking week. But Daniel made hot and sour soup tonight that is so good, and I cannot not talk about it, and so that's my great thing.
It is way too hot here for me to be thinking about any kind of heated soup. I just, the full body shudder that went through me when you said that, not because of the soup itself, I'm sure the soup is great, but just, boy, is it hot here. That's not my good thing.
Well, then what is your good thing? This is a good thing only zone.
My good thing is that I went to Charlie Jane Anders' book talk and signing in San Francisco for her new book, Victories Greater Than Death, which is the sequel to, Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak, which is the sequel to Victories Greater Than Death. Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak is what just came out. And so that was a lot of fun. I was stepping foot in an actual bookstore and attending an actual signing.
I mean, that sounds incredible.
Yes. It was great. And also, I'm a big fan of Charlie Jane, so that was cool too.
All right, positivity done with. Now we can be mean about stuff. What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a homemade limoncello spritzer because, as I have mentioned, it is hot as fuck, and I am dying.
It's funny because it's actually record-breaking hot for April here, by which I mean it hit 72 on April 7th, which is when we are recording this.
Yeah, it got into the 90. Well, it got to 89 today, which is basically 90.
Yeah.
And it is still very hot. And I am still very much dying.
I did spend as much time outside as possible today, but it was enjoyable time outside and not miserable time. So that was nice. But that was not my good thing. I can only pick one. That wasn't it. I'm not cheating.
No, you're not cheating because we're in an entirely different section now.
Mm-hmm.
And we are we are talking about weather. I'm complaining about the weather. So it's relevant, your comment. What are you drinking tonight?
So I don't know if our listeners know this, but there are two different genres of boxed wine. There are I was about to say rectangular shaped. They're all rectangle shaped. There are the ones that look like a little obelisk, or they are taller than they are long or deep or whatever. And those are the nice boxed wine. I would like everyone to know that when I say I drink boxed wine, I'm talking about the desktop computer shaped.
What you are talking about is the family historical boxed wine that you drink because we come from a long line of boxed wine drinkers.
Yes. I learned it from my mother.
Who learned it from her parents.
Yes. But sometimes when I drink boxed wine, I'm like, oh, it's local. Oh, no, not tonight. Tonight it is true boxed wine. Honestly, it tastes fine. I have had worse wine in a bottle than I have ever had boxed wine.
I mean, at least with boxed wine, you know what you're getting. They're very consistent. I think we're veering off into that alcohol podcast again.
I mean, we're gonna do it. Subscribe to our Patreon and hear us talk about booze a hell of a lot.
Moving on to books, though. Have you read anything?
Is that what this is about?
I mean, in theory, maybe not so much in practice. Have you read anything good lately?
No. This question is purely here only so that you can talk about how much you read that I don't.
I have been reading. It's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I read the sequel to The Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels, which was the League of Gentlewoman Witches by India Holton, which is a fantasy romance. And it was good. It was a lot of fun. I didn't like it as much as the first book. And there was a subplot that was kind of really unsatisfactory because it was like I thought it was going to be the main issue, like the main conflict, the cause of the main conflict, and then it was resolved within like 5 minutes. But at the very end, so like you had all of this time thinking that it was coming and it never did. And so that was a little unsatisfying. But overall, it was a very fun book. I would still recommend it.
I still want to read the first one. I mean, the next one too, but...
Yeah, no, the first one is fantastic.
Baby steps.
Yeah. The first one, I think you would get a kick out of it. It's one of those popcorn books, you know?
I do love me those. Yeah.
Yeah. It goes by really fast. You enjoy yourself. It's great.
Speaking of popcorn books, I would argue that almost all of Terry Pratchett falls under that category. Well, okay, no.
No.
Actually, if Terry Pratchett does not, then neither does Wisteria Society. Because when I defined popcorn books, it included the caveat of no nutritional value.
Yes. Okay. So I guess what I'm thinking by that is that nutritional value means there's a lot of commentary, like social commentary or deeper themes. And maybe you have that a little bit in Wisteria Society.
Isn't that the one with like the fun lady pirates?
It is the one with the fun lady pirates.
There's definitely I'm sorry. Lady Pirates is inherently social commentary.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Then yeah, I guess that means that Wisteria Society is a cut above a popcorn book.
I hesitate to say above because I don't want to discount the popcorn books that I love so much. But it is nice when you read something that is really fun and easy and also says something meaningful.
I think there's a time and a place for both kinds of novels.
Absolutely. And if we're not going to be splitting hairs, then yes, having thoughtful content is a cut above. That is what we're talking about today. We are about to take another step on our journey to the center of the Discworld.
I'm glad that you are here to do that because I never will.
Gotta use my radio voice somewhere.
Absolutely true.
We have read a number of Discworld books now. I'm not keeping track.
I think this is 14.
14?
I think this is 14.
This is the first one that has had an author's note at the beginning to give the reader context for earlier books. And I don't know if that is a publication thing or because this is the fourth witch book, but I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I do think that Pratchett is right in his author's note when he says that you need context for this book. Like, this isn't really a book that you can read without having read any of the previous witch novels.
I think it's mostly because of Magrat. I mean, it's her plot arc that we need context for.
I mean, I think it helps to have some context for the journey that the three witches have gone on, but particularly, yes, Magrat. Also, before we continue on with this discussion, we should mention that we aren't going to segment any spoilers for this book, mostly because a lot of our discussion, as we have planned it out in our notes, we'll see how it actually goes. But a lot of our discussion, we think, will be fairly high level and not really spoilery. There might be some light spoilers, but for this book, it really is more the journey than the destination. So it shouldn't affect your enjoyment of the book if you haven't read it. But if you're concerned about that, maybe turn off the podcast, go read the book, and then come back.
Well, as the bull in our podcast China shop, there is a circle that may summon elves. I'm going to spoil it for you. It does summon elves. And then I'll spoil it again. Turns out the good guys win. I mean, isn't that like...
Well, now I don't want to read the book at all. And I know what's going to happen.
I think the point of this book is not the steps. And this has been the case for a couple of Pratchett books that borrow extremely heavily from literature. There was obviously the Macbeth witch book.
Weird Sisters.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, even the fairy tale, which is a broad book, maybe that's just the witches ones, but they follow so heavily along classic plot lines that the plot points themselves really don't matter. Is it going to shock you that the good guys win? No, it's how they get there. And I don't think we're going to spoil that, really, because you have to read the book to get that and feel the journey. It really is a great example of it's the journey and not the destination.
Yeah, I have nothing to add there. I think you summed it up quite well.
But this is the first book that has a backstory beforehand.
Yes.
I don't know. I feel like, okay, the last Discworld book we read was Small Gods, and that really feels like a turning point to me in the series. This book makes a couple of very direct references to the concepts in Small Gods. Granted, those are concepts that were being slow cooked over the series, but they are word for word references now.
I mean, okay, yes, he mentions small gods like that. He uses that phrase at least once. I didn't notice it more than once, but I'm not sure I would say that he references it over much. Like one reference in a 350-page book is not that much.
There were 3 that I noticed that I did not write down. One was obviously small gods. Another was the concept of belief being power, which is a concept that was introduced before Small Gods, but it was really codified in that novel, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would call that a Small Gods reference in particular. It's true that we get, like, that's the whole point of Small Gods. But since it has shown up throughout the book, like particularly in Pyramids, for example, that doesn't seem to me to be referencing Small Gods, the book.
Okay, so maybe referencing is not the right phrase, but I think Small Gods solidified a lot of the concepts that Pratchett had been playing with beforehand. And now there are some extremely concrete points for him to play off of in a way that there wasn't before.
I mean, I think you're right in that Discworld is a much firmer universe now than it has been in previous books. And also, I think now we're getting to the point where all of the main, like, character groupings have been introduced and have had multiple books. And so we are starting to, because we're seeing repeat characters now more than we had, we are starting to get to the point where you need knowledge of the previous books in order to understand what's going on with the characters, if not necessarily the plot.
There will be new characters introduced later. You know, there's the going postal plot. Moist von Lipwig, my favorite, who is not here yet. But I think this is the point which Pratchett has truly sort of defined what he sees Discworld as. And everything else is playing in the sandbox that he has at this point, whether in Small Gods or just because of what he has done up until then, sort of really outlined.
Yeah, I think the sandbox now has edges. It's true. And I don't think that is because of Small Gods, but I think everything up to Small Gods was, as you say, defining those edges.
Maybe it's a chicken or an egg question. Maybe he finally figured out where he was going with this, and so Small Gods felt extremely clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been leading up to it in the process of writing these, the previous 13 novels. I imagine it would be hard to not solidify some of your ideas for the setting and some of the themes that you want to explore in a series over the course of 13 books. That's a lot of books.
Yeah. And has it been a decade for him? It must have. That's too many books.
The Color of Magic came out in 1983. Lords and Ladies came out in 1992. So
it's almost exactly a decade.
Almost exactly a decade, yeah.
also came out in, I assume he started writing it before then.
I mean, I don't know how long his writing process took. I couldn't tell you that, but I can tell you the publication date.
So we're saying there has been a decade of development, but I feel like the books from this point forward, which granted, I have not read in a very long time.
And at this point, it's been about 8 years for me too, since I last read them.
I feel like they're much more cohesive though, even though they follow different characters on different plots, going on very different adventures. They still feel like they are Discworld, which has, at Small Gods, been solidified.
Right. And again, I think that's because he's been writing these books for 10 years or, plus as you get into the other books. So he knows where he's going with Discworld. And he came to that conclusion at Small Gods, but it's not that Small God, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think there's less of a clear border than you see between Small Gods and what came before.
I don't think it's a coincidence that his book about philosophy and theology is the point where his world becomes extremely consistent.
But I mean, also, he'd been writing these books for 10 years by that point.
Right.
Small Gods also came out in 1992.
But, okay, he was ready to write Small Gods. He didn't write Small Gods earlier than that.
This is true.
That's also not the book we're talking about.
No. We have spent an awful lot of time talking about Small Gods for all that it is not the book at all that we're supposed to be discussing.
I think it's very interesting that it is this book after Small Gods. I will say the title Lords and Ladies at least once, because that is the book we're talking about tonight. That makes it so obvious how we have now codified the Discworld. There are some characters and themes that appear in this book that feel like my vision of Discworld that we have now arrived at. And yeah, we're here now. This is it. This is Discworld.
Yes. But for all that this is proper Discworld, it's not a good book to start with because you do need some of that earlier context.
Oh, yeah. You have to go through the growing pains.
I just mean I think that you shouldn't start with the witches books here. You should probably start with Witches Abroad, at least.
At least.
Because one of the questions that we do like to answer with when we talk about a Discworld book is this a good Discworld book to start with? And I think the answer here is it's a great Discworld book, but it's not the best place to start.
I mean, even Pratchett gives an author's note, which again, I don't know if it's a publication thing. Granted, I don't know what all the different versions are of the books, but this is the first book with a foreword to tell you what the fuck is going on. And that tells you a lot.
Yeah. And he even talks about that in, the author's note and how it's the first time he's had to write an author's note. I don't know if it's original to the edition.
So if you've never read a Discworld book, go away. If you never intend to read a Discworld book, go read Small Gods. That doesn't count. And everyone else, can we talk about death?
Yes, let's talk about death.
His introductory scene, I know I just talked a lot about how I feel like this book represents a lot of my personal vision of Discworld, but the representation of death, at least at the beginning with the blacksmith scene, feels very wrong.
I disagree with you. And I think that what you are picking up on is the fact that we are seeing death from the perspective of the human characters who don't have the warm and fuzzies towards him because they haven't seen him in, Mort and Reaper Man. Well, Reaper Man anyway. And so we're not getting that scene from his point of view. And I think if we were getting it from his point of view, it would be a lot warm and fuzzier.
To me, it is the way that the human blacksmith,
Nanny Ogg's son.
Yes. I have a lot of opinions about Nanny Ogg, and we'll get there.
We will get there.
They're acting like if they say the wrong phrase or even think the wrong thing, death will whisk them away. And that's fairy talk.
I mean, which is kind of the whole point of the book.
So
it sets that up.
Yes, that is my reason for it. It's not that it's from a human perspective. It's death is not the only supernatural creature that this blacksmith has to deal with. And so this blacksmith has to treat all of them as if they might whisk him away on a technicality. And the fact that we are seeing it with death is a coincidence.
Well, there's that too. I mean, I do think that there's the bit in the scene where Death asks Jason if he wants to take off the blindfold, and Jason like feels Death's face or something, and then is like, "Nah, I'm good." And so I think that that's a little bit of seeing that, you know, natural human fear of death, but it is setting up some of the fairy expectations for the rest of the book.
The thing about fairies is that they're all about thought crime. And the Discworld death that we have come to know would never punish someone for thinking the wrong thing at the wrong moment. And I have to assume that the rules that we are seeing, you know, stay blindfolded, don't think about the blindfold, all of that, is because blacksmiths service a large number of patrons, Death, who is incredibly reasonable, and fairies who would kill you as soon as look at you.
Yeah, I mean, Jason does very specifically say that the price of being able to shoe anything is that you have to shoe anything for whoever comes in, with the implication that there are a lot of things in this world that might come in.
And I love that we got to see that moment with Death, because I sure do love him.
And we don't see a lot of him in this book besides that one scene.
No, that's true. It's a lot of fairies and elf bullshit. How about that librarian, though?
I mean, I do love the librarian.
I think one of my favorite things about the librarian is how absolutely baffling and mysterious his origins are in every book, except that we as the reader know exactly his origin, because is he the only character who is 100% consistent throughout the series?
Possibly. I think that he is also possibly the only wizard who has survived the beginning books, because I think the entire staff, well, and Rincewind, but Rincewind doesn't really count because he doesn't spend a lot of time at the university, but I think the entire staff have had a changeover.
The Bursar has a similar vibe, but he might be technically a different man. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's unclear.
Yeah.
And Ridcully, while there are an awful lot of parallels between him and the first Arch-Chancellor that we meet in Equal Rights, he is a different Arch-Chancellor, but they're basically the same character. I mean, they are the same character, they just have different names. That's all.
But so we get to see the librarian in all of his orangutan glory, and just all of the coy little comments about the mythologizing around his origin that also we know that's very concrete, maybe the most concrete in all of Discworld history, literally. And the fact that characters treat it as this vague thing is just such a beautiful...
It's a nice little nod to readers who have read the story, the beginning of the series.
He's not only one of the most consistent characters, he's also definitely the most charming. Just the concept of some dude who gets turned into an orangutan and is like, no, don't turn me back, I'm good. I love that.
He's definitely usually the most laid back wizard, if he can still be considered a wizard.
He's definitely a wizard.
We never see him do magic.
Do we see Rincewind do magic?
We see Rincewind attempt to do magic.
Not sure if that counts.
We don't even see the librarian do that, though.
But he might. I mean, if he controls vast powers of magical books, I feel like that's more magical than Rincewind.
I mean, okay, yes, I will give you that, but I feel like his skills as a librarian are separate from his skills at wizardry, because none of the other wizards could do what he can do.
Yeah, he's just highly specialized.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I will accept the argument that librarianship is just a specialization of wizardry, of magic, I should say.
My only other comment is that I have a similar mail organization system. I don't have my book to bring up the quote, but it was something about ignorance and chaos.
The post tended to be picked up from the university gates by anyone who happened to be passing, and then left lying on a shelf somewhere, or used as a pipe lighter or a bookmark, or, in the case of the librarian, as bedding. Is that it?
Yeah, that was exactly it.
I should specify that this is for letters going into the university, not letters going out, although I'm sure the process is equally chaotic.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Any letter that arrives to my house is ignored for at least 18 months. I would stop, except there have been no consequences because it's all garbage anyway.
I look at my mail, then I sometimes just place it in a pile, but I do look at it. I act on the stuff that's important.
Why?
I want to know what's arrived. Normally it's junk. I mean, I don't get a lot of mail.
Okay, so we have talked a lot about how this book interacts with the Discworld series as a whole. However, there are a couple of really cool things that this book does for itself. And the first one that bears mentioning is elves and fairies being evil, which is some very, very nice mythological storytelling.
Yeah, we really get, I think, the kind of mythological elves rather than the fantasy elves, which is a change. And also kind of played on in the book, because they talk a lot about how there's the expectation in people's heads that elves are beautiful and elves are good. And one of those things is kind of true. And it's not that elves are good. And so we see a lot of characters kind of struggle with that difference between what they think they know and what is actually there in front of them.
The almost interchangeability between the phrase fairy and elf is also something that I had a whole disclaimer planned, but
well, it's the fae.
Yeah, I remember it from a class I took once. It was a medieval British fantasy literature class, and elves and fairies were the same fucking thing, basically. and
even Tolkien in some of his earlier writings uses the words interchangeably, or he uses fairy in some of his other early writings to describe what he would later come to call elves.
Yeah, that's against everything that I was saying, because the Tolkien elf has nothing to do with the mythology elf. I guess they also eventually go away to a parallel universe, but that's about it. They're much more benevolent.
His elves are much more benevolent, but I do think that, at least in terms of terminology, there was some interchangeability before he settled on using elf.
That's fair. I think in modern pop culture, there is more understanding with the sort of darker fairy origin. And then, the fae and the word fairy obviously are more deeply connected. And elf is sort of just the Tolkien thing now. But there's still the idea of the changeling and fairy deals. Those are all, I think, maybe more common. Whereas elves are Legolas.
Yeah, I think when one thinks of the word elf, one does usually think of Tolkien these days.
Yeah. So just because he knew they were the same.
Yeah.
Mean that his creation has not grown legs of its own, so to speak. But I really like that this book sort of returns to that darker definition, the scarier origin.
Yeah. And I think, I'd say, correct me if I'm wrong, but You probably have no idea because it's been quite some time since you've read the books. I think this is not the last time that elves really show up. I think we might get them in some of the Tiffany Aching books too.
Oh, I've never read those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also like that in this book, the witches, well, Granny and Nanny, because they specifically never tell Magrat, which is a point of huge conflict. And Magrat is 100% right. And I am always on her team.
They have a great quote, though, about how, and I didn't write the page down, so I can't tell you the page, and I might be slightly misquoting, but one of them says something along the lines of, she'll be fine. We taught her everything she knows. And the other says, maybe we should have taught her everything we know. And then, no, that would have taken too much time.
It's why I'm always on Magrat's side, though. The flow of information and artificial control of information is something that bothers me in reality and fiction equally. But the point is that the witches know how malicious these elves truly are. And I would say in most cases, they are right for not telling people that the elves are the mysterious force beyond the portal, because they're right. People would misunderstand. But if anyone would understand, it's your
I don't think Magrat would have understood, though, because I think the Magrat that we meet in the previous books she's very much a, like, bluebirds and flowers kind of person. And I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but I don't know that she would have been able to overcome her view of what elves are like until she actually met an elf.
Well, then couldn't the witches have just described the elves and not used the word elf?
Would she have? I mean, I don't know if that would have helped much. Like they go through this kind of with the fairy tale stories in Witches Abroad. And she's very much like, no, this is romantic, and we'll help Ella or Cinders or whatever her name is. And like fairy godmothering is this great thing and not kind of this double-edged sword. And she needs to like go through the experience before she actually like internalizes the darker side of things. So I think she's one of those people who has to experience it to understand it. And I don't think telling her would have helped.
Well, in that case, then, couldn't you say, hey, this is a fairy godmother situation?
Probably. I mean, yeah. I'm not arguing that Nanny and Granny were 100% right, but I think that they were right in their judgment that she wouldn't understand elves if they called them elves.
Well, that's unfair because Nanny was the one who suggested they should have told her. So you're saying Granny was wrong to have hidden it from her.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
obviously Nanny is the best person in the entire series. So
I've got some issues. I like Nanny. I've got some issues with her.
Oh, no, she definitely has some problems, but not as many as Granny. So
disagree. I think
Granny's a condescending bitch. So.
And Nanny is a sexist old woman. So
yeah.
I mean, equally bad.
All right.
Equally lovable, but equally bad.
Then we are agreed. I mean, we basically already started about Magrat.
We did.
But I feel like this book has her character arc that I really had wanted in Witches Abroad.
Yeah, it is nice because she has a very definite growth here, and she learns to stand up for herself in a way that we don't see in Witches Abroad, and we don't see her advocate for herself and, hit people with axes.
And just decide to be a warrior queen. We should all just decide to be warrior queens. I want that for every single person. Everyone should get to be a warrior queen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah, it's clearly the best archetype. And we finally see her stand up to Granny and Nanny and have it not completely backfire. Because as much as I want her to stand up to them, if it ends up making everything go bad, then it undermines it entirely. But then we get to see her stand on her own and stand up for herself and help win the day. And that was really nice. That's really what I wanted for Magrat all along. And I was clinging to it in the earlier books, but it was this book where it actually happens.
It does actually happen. I mean, I think part of that character growth is a little undermined by the fact that all of the action that occurs in regards to like her getting married and her actually moving into the castle, like that's not her that drives that action. That's actually Granny who's kind of orchestrated all of it. So I do think that takes away from a little bit from Magrat standing on her own.
Well, Sarah, you have given me the perfect lead in to our next podcast.
Tell us all about this podcast, Lily.
BACEd, relationship advice from a bi and ace person. The catch is that the answer will always be, what the fuck, just talk to each other.
I mean, the answer in this case is just talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm not wrong.
No.
One of the sort of ongoing tensions of this book is the relationship between Magrat and Varence, who sort of met and developed their relationship 2 books ago. And now they're suddenly getting married, which is obviously bullshit. And they need to talk to each other.
Well, I mean, I think that saying they met and developed their relationship is a little bit generous. They met and they sat silent in fields next to each other for a while. And that's about all that they've done, because then Magrat went off for 9 months of adventures.
So you're saying that they need to talk to each other.
They do need to talk to each other.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. So this relationship, they met, they had chemistry. There was the unspoken understanding, which we're not even going to get into how that's not a real thing, that they will get married someday. And Varence acted on that because, frankly, that was the understanding between both of them, which we only know because we got to see into Magrat's head. No real person would have that information. But we know that was truly understood between both of them. But then he acts on it and she's upset because there's no such thing as an unspoken agreement when it comes to a romantic relationship. What the fuck?
And we do find that he acts on it because Granny has sent him a letter saying, you know, you need to do something, otherwise nothing is ever going to happen. But the response to that is probably not organize a wedding. It's, you know, talk to your fiance.
I mean, that was exactly what I would say to him, to be fair. You need to do something, but you're right. The do something was apparently too vague.
Yeah. Well, no, I think Granny does, if not specify, at least implies that he should just, you know, go ahead and organize that wedding. But that's not what any, you know, normal person would advise.
But that's not even where the conflict arises. Magrat is trying to adapt to life as a queen, or almost queen, because Varence is the king of Lancre. That's in an earlier book. You should have read it. We already warned you. And she can't kind of figure out where to fit in or where she can be helpful, because she wants to do stuff, which is very reasonable, to which the answer is, talk to him.
Instead, they find themselves eating on other sides of a very long table.
I mean, I do that on purpose because it's hilarious. So I can't fault them for that.
But the difference there is you're doing it on purpose with someone you talk to.
Yes. Someone who I have never gone more than 15 minutes of not texting during a day in the last 10 years.
Yeah, you're not trying to form a relationship with Danny. You have a relationship with Danny. You can do things like that.
It is funny, though.
Varence and Magrat don't have that.
No, they need to talk to each other. That's okay.
I'm not actually convinced that they have had more than like 5 conversations in the entirety of their relationship.
We have seen them kiss, though, right? I think they've kissed.
maybe once. And we've seen them talk a couple of times in Weird Sisters. We don't see them talk at all in this book, I don't think, at least not proper conversation.
It's implied that they interact in between Weird Sisters and Sisters Abroad. No, Witches Abroad.
Yes, it's implied. We don't see it.
But we don't see it, and it's kind of implied that it doesn't go great. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also implied that they spend a lot of time awkwardly just standing there. And not even implied, like specifically, said.
I have the impression that Magrat was like, I'm a strong, independent woman. And Varens was like, I don't know what to say in response to that. And Magrat was like, fine, I'm going to go do witch stuff. And then that was all of their interactions.
Yeah, I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, BACEd podcast will solve all of your problems. In this case, the response is, fucking talk to them. Hey, turns out the answer is talk to them. Are you ready? Give me another one. I bet you the answer will be talk to them.
Tune in next time.
How many literary couples can we say, hey, just talk to them?
Basically all of them.
Hamlet and Ophelia? Hey, talk to them. Romeo and Juliet? Hey.
Oh God. Don't even get me started.
Othello and I forgot her name? Josephine? No, that's not it. What's her name? It doesn't matter. Talk to them. These were all Shakespeare examples because it's on the brain, but I'm not wrong.
I mean, they do just need to talk.
Can we talk about all of the problems that would have been solved if they had just talked to each other first?
Romeo and Juliet wouldn't be a book.
Well,
or a play.
Yes. I meant in the book that we're talking about right now.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I mean, okay. So
actually, this book is only the book plot is not based on them having romantic issues. So yeah, I actually think it would be a big deal.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that's not the conflict in the book. So I don't think that the actual book would be much changed, but Magrat would be a lot happier.
Oh, absolutely. She spends so much of the book miserable because she wants to help and can't figure out how, but refuses to ask Varens how.
She does. I mean, in her defense, she does go look for him a couple of times and he's like off doing things because he doesn't realize that, you know, his fiance wants a relationship with him and wants to be, you know, doing stuff. So that's on him. But also there are probably more opportunities than just the one time he was out talking to the pig farmers.
It's very easy to ambush your spouse. She got to figure that shit out.
In a large castle, it's probably a little harder.
I mean, she knows where he sleeps.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's maybe a little harder than in a, 1,500 square foot house.
Oh, you think my house is 1,500 square feet?
No, I do not think you. I do not think your house is 1,500 square feet.
Yeah, no.
My house is not 1,500 square feet, and my house is larger than yours.
And I bet you can ambush the pugs whenever you want.
I can indeed. Or they can ambush me, more like.
Well, this ends this segment of BACEd. Hey, just fucking talk to each other.
Moving on to people who do talk to each other, can we talk about Nanny and Casanunda?
Oh, yes. I am more excited about that than how Nanny is a shithead, but we'll talk about that later.
No, we will talk about my very large, very glaring issues with Nanny that I've had through the other books, but it's not been quite as prevalent in the text. But we're going to talk about nice things first, which is Nanny and Casanunda. Casanunda is a dwarf that we first meet in Witches Abroad, and he is supposed to be the world's best liar and the world's best lover, something like that.
In that order.
In that order. And so he has, a relationship with Nanny and Witches Abroad, or they meet and, have some dances. And he shows up again in Lords and Ladies. and he takes Nanny out for a date. And I really, really enjoyed the way that Pratchett described Casanunda's date with Nanny, because like she's an old woman. She's not particularly...
She's a grandmother.
Yeah, she's a grandmother. Like, she's not what one would consider classically beautiful at this point. She's canonically, has one tooth and has had a lot of kids and all of that. So in sum, Nanny's not classically beautiful. She's old, which is not to say that old people can't be beautiful, I suppose. But
no,
Nanny
we're talking about, societal, basic garbage shit. And
yes,
I think we can agree that that's an overarching theme.
Yes. But the way that he describes his feelings watching Nanny react to everything that they're doing on the date, which is eating, even when it's not what he expects, like he actually really, really enjoys it. And I love the way that presents itself in the text. And I think that's a great way of showing how someone can like another person without focusing on their physical attributes.
I agree.
It's really, really good. It's done very well.
So you may have heard that we are starting another podcast called BACEd, where we give relationship advice. And
can you tell us where that name comes from, Lily?
Oh, bi and ace. Based. Perspectives on a relationship. And no one's going to ask us for our opinion, so we're just going to give it on literature. And I think this is a great example of a relationship where they fucking talk to each other.
I mean, I do think in this case they sometimes talk at each other more than to each other, because they do sometimes seem to be having two different conversations, but it works for them, and they are at least talking with each other.
For me, it's more they are on the same page as to what their relationship is, which is something that we saw even back in the previous book, Witches Abroad, where they had sort of met at a ball and they danced together, and Casanunda, frankly, helped save the entire day. But then at the end, Nanny was busy. And so Casanunda just went off and seduced someone else. And that was fine, because that's what their relationship was. And that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I like their friends with benefits relationship an awful lot. It's very good.
Oh, that's the perfect description, because they're friends and they have benefits, including saving the entire plot of a novel. Being maybe a little bit of a deus ex machina. That could be a benefit.
I think so. Not in this novel, but
no, yes. You're right. I'm referring to Witches Abroad, but I think he deserves that mantle moving forward.
I think so. I think you're right there.
Because I at least brought the charm that I felt for him in Witches Abroad towards this novel, because I already knew how reasonable and flexible he was, and what a good guy.
And I think that he in particular is a good example of why you need some additional background before reading Lords and Ladies.
Good point.
Because his character really does benefit from having the context of Witches Abroad and knowing him from that novel. So he's not just some rando who shows up and, tries to seduce Nanny. Like, they have a relationship. They know each other. He helped save the day.
He doesn't even end up with her in Witches Abroad. He ends up with the sad court lady
whose outfit Nanny stole, or Granny stole. One of them stole.
But I mean, they was having a bad night until Casanunda showed up. He's like maybe the truest good guy of that book. He only makes every situation better where he shows up. And I don't think any other character can claim that.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Casanunda.
The true hero of Discworld.
The true example of good communication.
Yes.
And that is the thesis of our argument.
Okay, now that we've talked about the good things about Nanny Og, can we talk about the really, really horrible thing?
I underlined it too. It was so gross. I hate it so much.
And it's kind of mentioned in some of the previous books, but it's not really like openly spoke. Like it's not very blatant. But in this book, it's the way that she treats her daughters-in-law is just abominable. You know, like she forces them to do all the housework and she forgets all of their names and is proud of that.
And she specifically torments them.
Yeah.
It's awful.
That's supposed to be a joke. But it's not funny, and Pratchett is better than that.
Well, I think it's very telling, probably about myself, that I attributed that to Pratchett and not to Nanny Og, even though she is his character. That's not how fiction works at all.
No, that's not how fiction works.
No, but in my head, I was like, oh, Pratchett's making a really bad joke. That's not what she's actually like.
I mean, on the one hand, I think I agree with you, because I think that the spirit of Nanny Og, like what Pratchett is going for with this jolly old woman, is not someone who's incredibly sexist. But on the other hand, yes, she's his creation and you can't divorce them of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, the Nanny Og that he wrote, at least in this book, is like that.
Wouldn't it have been so much better if she trained all of her sons to do housework and then set up all of her daughters-in-law and daughters for a life of luxury? Like, that would be fantastic.
Or like, and this is not romantic relationship, but here's a thought. What if she just talked to her daughters-in-law?
What? Just talk to them? That could never solve anything. Sarah, you're talking witchcraft right there.
Well, it's appropriate given the subject.
No, it's true. That whole scene feels like a ham-fisted joke.
And it comes
not good.
It comes up multiple times. Like it's not just once that he talks about how she abuses her, her daughters-in-law. Like almost every time she is in a scene, that's not true because she's in an awful lot of scenes, but more than once, more than twice, the book talks about or mentions how she treats, her in-laws.
But her female in-laws.
Yes, very specifically, because it does contrast that with the people who marry her daughters, and she takes them in and treats them like sons. And she remembers their names, and, she always has a good word for them. And it is the polar opposite from how she treats her daughters-in-law.
Nanny Og should know better.
Nanny Og should know better. Terry Pratchett should know better.
Yeah. How do you disentangle them? I agree. It feels like it's supposed to be funny, but it actually just fucking sucks.
Yeah. Like, I think it's very clearly supposed to be funny, and it just is not.
It falls so flat. It's really bad. Yeah.
And it
doesn't even fit with her character.
It doesn't.
She's pretty feminist in almost everything else she does.
Yeah.
Except for this one area where Nanny Og is like, oh, except those women, they fucking suck. Like, what?
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it so jarring, is that contrast between what we think we know of her character and what we see in this particular regard.
Well, even what she has displayed of her character.
Yeah.
Versus what she is suddenly doing.
Yeah.
I was like, that doesn't fit.
Yeah. And it's been long enough since I've read the rest of the series to be confident that changes. I certainly hope it does. I hope that this particular aspect of her character gets dropped, but
I don't think it does. I'm trying to remember. I feel like that's a thing, though. Like she's very critical of her daughters-in-law.
Yeah, I do think it's a thing.
Yeah.
And like, if she's critical of all of her in-laws, like if she's critical of her sons-in-law too, I can accept that. She can be critical of them equally, but she can't only be critical of one of them.
It's very specific.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one witch left in our triad, who is Granny, who has created a lot of the conflict of this book because you gotta fucking talk to each other.
I don't know if she's created the conflict per se, because the elves would have come out without her. I mean, like that's not on her.
But she could have talked to Magrat.
But she could have talked to Mag. She creates some of the interpersonal conflict. I'll grant you that.
Which is obviously the conflict that I am more interested in.
She does have a wonderful quote. It's no surprise that of the three witches, Granny has always been my favorite. She has a wonderful quote. Granny kept her clock for the tick. It made the place seem lived in, which is very much part of why I enjoy having a clock. So I saw that and I was like, yes, Granny, you get me. Her clock probably goes off every 15 minutes too. I'm sure it's Westminster chimes.
It definitely does. There's no question about it. My solution, on the other hand, is to host poltergeists, aka cats.
I mean, pugs help too, but like you need that tick and you need that chime. How else are you going to know what time it is when your lights are off, you're trying to sleep, but you can't sleep and you don't want to look at your phone? You need the clock to chime.
The answer is always, it's anything o'clock and the cats are skittering up and down the hallway. And that is why I'm a Nanny fan, because she does have Grebo, who does not show up in this book very much, but her cat Grebo is very good. And he shows up when it counts.
Grebo is a very good cat by our not actually having to interact with Grebo standards. To be fair, we probably would like Grebo even if we did have to interact with him. But
I absolutely would. It would be my fault that he hated me 100%.
Yes. He would probably not be very happy.
Oh, yeah.
I also really enjoyed, Granny has a great quote about how there's really no point in looking at the past and regretting what might have been, because what could have been could have easily been bad as it is good. And she's specifically talking with Ridcully because she and Ridcully, had a thing. And in one universe, alternate universe, they got married and had kids. But in this one, of course, he's the Arch Chancellor and she's head witch, if witches had heads.
If witches had heads, this is a really good sentence.
If witches had heads, they would just talk to each other. And so Ridcully is saying, do you ever wonder what life would have been like if you'd said yes? Said Ridcully. No. I suppose we'd have settled down, had children, grandchildren, that sort of thing. Granny shrugged. It was the sort of thing romantic idiots said, but there was something in the air tonight. What about the fire? She said. What fire? Swept through our house just after we were married? Killed us both? What fire? I don't know anything about any fire. Granny turned around. Of course not. It didn't happen. But the point is, it might have happened. You can't say, if this didn't happen, then that would have happened, because you don't know everything that might have happened. You might think something would be good, but for all you know, it could have turned out horrible. You can't say, if only I'd, because you'd be wishing for anything. The point is, you'll never know. You've gone past, so there's no use thinking about it. So I don't. And I really admire that kind of pragmatic view. She's not wrong.
It's also a really wonderful response to the multiverse plotline, which is sort of a subplot or a sub-theme throughout this book, that Granny is seeing her alternative timeline.
Well, the trousers, the cloth of the trousers of time is very thin right now.
Yes.
So it's very easy for Granny to catch glimpses or feelings of what other grannies are feeling.
And that's the source of the conflict between her and Ridcully, because they could have been together and they weren't, and maybe they should just fucking talk to each other. But they do, and that's why it's not a big underlying conflict. Hey, look at that.
Well, they do now.
Right.
But, when they were both 18 or whatever, they did not, and they should have.
Oh, no one expects 18-year-olds to make good choices. That's fine.
No, but their lives probably still would be improved by just talking to each other.
That's true. Yeah, because Granny could have been the head witch and still had a family, since Nanny's a witch and had a family.
Well, but then she wouldn't have been, I mean,
Granny, yeah.
You need, because the whole theme of the witches is that you have the maiden, mother, and crone. And
well, no, that's the meta theme.
okay,
I don't think Pratchett is saying that you're not allowed to have more than one witch with children in a coven.
No, that's a meta theme. But I think that if we are looking at Discworld as a series of books and not Discworld as its own specific place, every time take Magrat, for example, when Magrat when Magrat marries, when she has children.
No, becomes married is correct.
When she becomes married and has children, she's out of the coven. Like, she's no longer a part, and she is replaced. And so I think that for the archetype in the books, if Granny had children, it wouldn't have worked with the triad that Pratchett is describing.
That I think is too much meta being mixed with the storyline.
Okay. I mean, it is meta, but
because
also
Magrat leaves because she's mad at Granny. She doesn't leave because she's getting married.
Well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
She actually doesn't get married until she leaves. So she doesn't even decide to move into the castle until she's so mad at Granny that she can't stay anymore.
I mean, I think there's also narrative requirements.
I disagree. I think he's playing into a trope, which is great and cool and fun. That does not make it a requirement.
No, I'm saying that for what he wants to do, it's a requirement.
Mm.
And I don't think that what he wanted to do involved multiple members of the coven. I think he very specifically wanted there to be the maid, mother, and crone. And so Granny had kids.
That's Pratchett's will.
Yes.
Not anything in world. I'm saying we're mixing meta with
okay.
There is nothing in Discworld that says multiple witches can't have children.
This is true.
So we're saying purely Pratchett has decided that these women may not have children.
This is true. I mean, I don't actually think that Granny wants kids.
Because Pratchett does. I mean, if we're going to get that meta, because Pratchett decided she doesn't.
Well, Granny doesn't strike me. I mean, and it says very clearly in the book that Granny doesn't like children.
Because
and that children like her a lot.
That. Okay, if we're going to get that, if we're going to bring meta into it, then it's entirely Pratchett's idea. And Granny had no power whatsoever.
No,
so either we're bringing the meta into it or we're not.
No, I'm taking the meta out, right? Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'll let you take the meta out. But Granny very specifically doesn't like kids, so I don't think that she wanted kids in the first place.
Right. So, that's why this Granny didn't have kids.
Yes.
That doesn't mean she couldn't have been a witch and also had kids.
This is true, but I don't think that this Granny ever wanted that.
Well, this Granny didn't. That's true. We're getting into a multiverse conversation now. There was a version of Granny who did want kids. It was a different version.
There was a version of Granny who wanted to get married to Ridcully, and that might have come with kids. I'm not convinced that version of Granny wanted kids anymore.
That's the definition of a multiverse, though. There was a version of her that wanted kids.
One among many. Okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah. If there's infinite multiverses, then one of them wanted kids. At least one of them.
Some things have to stay consistent.
That's meta.
I think so. Do we want to talk about why you should read this book?
Oh, when should you read this book?
After you read Witches Abroad.
This is a really, really, really good book. It's probably my favorite witches book, but it's not a good starting point. You should definitely read at least some Discworld first, and probably at least one or two other witch books first.
Yeah. I'm not 100% convinced that you need to read Weird Sisters in order to enjoy Witches Abroad. But I do think that you need to read Witches Abroad in order to enjoy Lords and Ladies.
I think Small Gods would really help before reading this book. Sarah, I know you don't think that as much, but...
No, I don't. I mean, I think you should read Small Gods because it's a very, very good Discworld book. And I think you should read Small Gods because it's a good book in general, even if you're not interested in Discworld. But I don't think that it's required reading for Lords and Ladies.
If you like world building, you should read Small Gods. If you want to know what the fuck is going on with the Discworld before you read a Discworld narrative, you should read Small Gods before you read Lords and Ladies.
Yes, but you still should read Witches Abroad before you read Lords and Ladies too.
Yeah, probably. But even in that case, in order to really understand Magrat and Varence, you should still read Weird Sisters.
I don't think that's...
Because this book deals with their relationship. And so don't you need to know, like, how they met and what the fuck?
Well, no, because they never talk.
That's not true. Not in Weird Sisters.
They have like 2 conversations.
Interact. They absolutely interact in Weird Sisters. It's the basis of their entire relationship.
They interact, but they don't have a lot of conversations.
Doesn't that make those conversations that much more important then?
I mean, we had a whole argument about how they need to talk more, so...
I mean, they need to talk more. I'm not taking that back. But if you want to know how they got to this point, Weird Sisters is absolutely foundational.
I suppose. I still think that you could enjoy Lords and Ladies without having read it, but I will concede that you will get more out of Lords and Ladies if you have read it.
Fair enough. So, I have a words are weird.
Hit me with your words are weird, Lily.
Why does Pratchett always hyphenate orang-utan?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I was the one who Googled it. That was a bad question. I'm sorry. That was my question, though.
I mean, I could have given your answer, but I thought that since you were the one who Googled it, you should be the one to answer it.
I appreciate you. So according to english.stackexchange.com, which I am not going to cross-reference.
It has to be good because it's Stack Exchange.
Right? Who would go on the internet and lie? That's the extent of my research, so take that as you will. But apparently, the word orangutan comes from the Malay language for orang, man, and hutan, forest. So it's actually 2 hyphenated words.
Or it's 2 words that have been hyphenated in English when it entered the English language.
Yes, thank you. Forest man. And I really liked the comment that suggests the phrase hyphen decay, a noun phrase that becomes so regularly used that it becomes treated as a single word. So, for example, from the same user, bell boy becomes bell boy and then bell boy. Imagine that it was a space and then a hyphen and then it was the same word. This is a podcast, so this is actually the worst format to be having this conversation. The next example is typewriter and then typewriter and then typewriter. Are you enjoying this? Is this great? I could keep going for laptop, but I feel like I've made my point.
Or email, which I feel like when I first started using the internet was e-hyphenated mail, and now is just email with no space or hyphen in between.
Oh, I would tease someone so hard if they used a space or a hyphen in email.
Yeah, but that's my point. Like, yeah. I feel like when I first started using the internet, you did see the hyphen as often as not.
Mm-hmm.
And now you never see it.
I could go on and on about internet isms, but that's not what this point is about. This point is about orang-utan, which is apparently...
And hyphen decay.
Yes, and hyphen decay. It turned into hyphen decay. That's wild, though. I feel like I do see that with other terms, which are escaping me at the moment, but...
Well, it's interesting because what it makes me wonder is orangutan with a hyphen, is that a Britishism? a Pratchettism, a old-fashioned Britishism or old-fashioned ism, or is it just a weird quirk?
Are you
of hyphen decay?
implying that I should have clicked on more than one link when I searched why is orang-utan hyphenated?
But I do a thing
I
like
resent that.
I would never.
This is not a research podcast. This is, hey, words are weird.
And I mean, to be fair, like, I have no idea if the internet would tell us that,
I clicked on the answer that looked the most reasonable.
And the answer that you got was very interesting. Like, I think it's made for a great conversation. But I do wonder if having the hyphen is something that we have dropped in the US or if it's dropped more widely.
For the query, why does Pratchett hyphenate orangutan? All of the results are just Discworld wikis. So I don't actually think I trust that more than Stack Exchange.
I mean, honestly, I joked when I said Stack Exchange is super trustworthy, but like, I use Stack Exchange, not the English.Stack Exchange, the tech Stack Exchange, but I use it for work all the time. So I am inclined to trust it because the people on the tech side generally have good answers that help me.
I like that answer. I'm right. It has been determined because Sarah uses my source for other stuff. All right. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Our Linktree also has a link to our Patreon, where you can support us and find our show notes and quite a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.